Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar on teaching K through 5 students the tools and techniques of deciphering personal primary sources. This evening's host is Melissa Knowles. She has 17 years of teaching the K through 8 in the classroom and the library, and she has worked with Social Studies School Service since 2015. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Melissa.
Wonderful, thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're here tonight. I love when we have a lot of attendees and we can have some good conversations. I only have one question to ask during the webinar. However, feel free to post any comments or questions as we're going in that chat area. And Jessica will let me know. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Jessica, I'm going to move this over to the side so it's not in my way. I have filled the screen. So if you'll just keep an eye on that for me. So yes, we are going to be talking about using personal primary sources in K through 5 classrooms. How can we do it easily? Okay, so first, what are personal primary sources? I put personal primary sources into a Google search, and when I did that, I was not getting any results. I got a lot of definitions on primary sources and secondary sources, but nothing that said personal primary sources. So I have created a definition for you. So personal refers to a story from one's life or experiences. And then primary sources, they're records of historical times and events made by people that were actually there. So when I put those two together, I came up with a personal primary source is an original record of a person's life or experience. So my brain immediately went, of course, to the Diary of Anne Frank. Working in the library, I work with a lot of books, and that's probably one of the most famous diaries we have out there, or at least in my age groups that I've worked with. Anne Frank is what I think about. Diaries are not the only examples, though. We can use letters, journals, and oral histories. Those are all also excellent examples that fit that definition. Why do you want to use personal primary sources in your classroom? While I'm sharing this slide, if you'll answer this question in the chat box, what challenges do you have or do you anticipate when you're using primary sources, personal primary sources with your elementary age students? So if you'll add that into the chat box to help guide the lesson and get some of your thoughts and ideas out. So personal primary sources can help your students in learning to think like historians, along with many other benefits. First, they assist students in developing a deeper knowledge of the content by connecting them emotionally to what they're learning. You can really engage a student's emotions by presenting an issue, and we're going to look at some of those in just a few minutes. You can connect through many different learning styles because you can work with these materials a lot of different ways. And they're going to realize that history is happening all the time and that they are absolutely a part of history. Also, it encourages students to make connections with their learning, using the Diary of Anne Frank as an example, and maybe our current social distancing requirements. Wouldn't students just get so excited and very easily connect to their feelings about social distancing and then be able to make a comparison, at least about what it felt to be cooped up, to Anne Frank and her situation and what she went through? So these documents can give opportunities for students also to see many different sides of an issue, allowing them to draw their own conclusions and create their own learning. Personal primary sources also give students real history to practice comparing and contrasting and analyzing for biases through questioning and discussions with peers and teachers. So they're able to use all of those reasoning and problem-solving skills with these documents. They perfectly embed in for getting students to practice wondering and discovering, questioning, finding out their interests, and directing their own learning. So now let's look at some of your comments down here. So I'm gonna go up. Florence, okay. Handwriting from the past can be hard to read. Yes, I agree. I have found that a lot have, that you can fairly easily find documents that have the original along with an example. So definitely looking for those, but also just evaluating those differences with students could bring up some interesting topics and conversations just in the differences of what it looks like and how they wrote. And Chelsea said, biggest struggle is simply finding resources. Yes, at the end, I'm going to give you several places to look for resources. And hopefully those areas will help you. I agree with you. I found almost too much was my problem, but then finding ones that fit your age group definitely can have some challenges at times. Let's see who this was. Like many schools, we're doing distance learning and plan to have them keep journals. Wonderful. My concern is that some students will do the bare minimum since we aren't there to prompt them. So what my thought about that is going to be in how your strategies behind it, questioning techniques using the journaling, having them maybe share. Maybe they would be less likely if they had to share what they wrote, maybe in an image file or picture, or hold it up to the camera when you're doing a Zoom meeting. You could even do some comparing and contrasting. I think working with those with your students would definitely help encourage them to go a little bit more in depth with that, using questioning strategies and different activities. Handwriting, difficult for students to understand how some speak with the verbiage that are used in those specific time periods. Using Active Classroom as an example, they offer usually the primary source and then also a written, a summary in today's language. I was trying to think of what the word that they actually use usually to call it, but just a summary in today. So I think a lot of times you're going to find that you can get around some of that. Another way is to look for vocabulary first. Have them find things that they don't understand and figure that out and then go back and reread. So maybe do multiple readings, but also use things that they created. And we're going to talk about that. So I think that was all of our comments for now. I hope I didn't miss any. Jessica, let me know if I did. A quote from the Library of Congress. In analyzing primary sources, I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can read it. What was I thinking? It explains the steps to success that we're going to look at on the next slide. We're going to take students wherever we get them and move them through the steps to become learners, thinkers, citizens. Personal primary sources can be incorporated into any content area. So sometimes when we're very limited on our time to teach social studies, and I know in our school system, we are focusing right now on reading and math. Social studies and science are sort of on by the wayside, but we as teachers know how important that is. So finding ways to incorporate it in the things that we're doing now is going to be incredibly important so our students don't miss out on all the great vocabulary, deep analysis that they get during social studies. So let's look at these steps. I liked this to just give you sort of a breakdown of how we're moving students, which was going to make complete sense to you. Kindergarten, we're focusing more on them as individuals and just making observation, comparisons, and then we expand as we go into grades 1 and 2, connecting to families, observing, analyzing, comparing. So we're just getting a little bit deeper with it as we move into 3rd and 4th, community and local region. Most social studies, and I know young citizens by social studies school services, follows this exact same step by step through building and growing the student's world. So by 3 and 4, we're in the community and region, inviting students to create their own point of view, opinion, and analyze bias. So that by grade 5, they are connecting primary sources to the nation and the history that they're learning, comparing things, multiple points of view again, biases, and constructing new knowledge. So you can see as we're growing through the grade levels and through their ability to analyze. So let's look at what this looks like in each of these grade levels. So in kindergarten, it could be as simple as a journal. Daily, tell us about you. Well, you can take those to those daily journals that you're doing, and you can compare and contrast. What did the students do over spring break vacations or staycations, as we usually take, or holidays? You can allow students to talk, share, and develop opinions. What makes a family? Why are you sad in this writing? They can discuss questions and what questions are. In kindergarten, it is all the time, ask for a question and you get a story. That's not a question. So a good thing to do would be to intro this by explaining what is a question, and it gives them a great opportunity to practice all of that. Have students practice wondering. What do they wonder about things that their friends have written? Why did Jada throw a beanbag into the jack-o'-lantern? What was she doing? You can also use letter writing. Thank you letters on Nurse Appreciation Day, incorporating sight words into these writings. Discover the reasoning behind their writing. So asking questions. You can even bridge into a post office community helper unit or interact with pen pals in other regions or other areas, or even just at other schools. Through questioning and sharing, all of these are adapted to making those basic observations and comparisons in their writing. So that in 1st and 2nd grade, I loved this writing my husband actually sent to me. It says, Ben, he's home to school, and unfortunately it's not going good. My mom's getting stressed out. My mom is really getting confused. We took a break so my mom can figure this stuff out. And I'm telling you, it is not going good. So I loved that. And I was thinking, you could take a lot of ways, why was your mom stressed out? What were you both doing at the time? And really continue going with this. You could even compare it to a situation that's going really well. What's the difference? How does it compare? So include their family at this point more. And in letter writing, my son in 2nd grade would send me emails through his school Gmail account, and he would share documents with me. So even using email with students this young is absolutely acceptable and encouraged. So at this point too, you can also, and in kindergarten, but you can ask family input, such as their past school experiences or stories from their past. You can even expand to where families go. So we used where families went on one spring break. Well, we were able to graph that using math. We were writing about it. We were talking about sentence structure. We were also using adjectives and describing. So we were able to take social studies and embed it with um, multiple subjects very easily in something that they had already done. So in third and fourth, we're now expanding into their community and region. So rules are, I think, are always going to be the start of every grade level. But I thought it maybe would be fun to bring in George Washington's rules of civility. Maybe even try to practice some of those and see how they go. See what the students think about them. You can also bring in diaries and letters. Both continue to be student created, and now I think we can bring in some more historical diaries and letters with our beginning readers. State studies also usually begin in these grades. Native Americans and histories were always a challenge for me to teach. So making history real is a great tool for introducing the history of the state when students don't really understand the background. So how we chose to do this was more of a secondary source. It was more of a secondary primary source. Sorry, we had a wonderful Native American teacher in our area who was also Native American. So some of this probably was a primary, but she helped us a great deal with making it real for the students and making them understand what it was like to be a Native American in this time period in Alabama, because I had to teach it without my students really knowing anything about what was going on in history at that time, what was going on around our state, why these things were happening. It was a big challenge, and this really helped by engaging students with real life accounts and real things that had happened. So it really helped. Ben Franklin's letters about electricity, I thought, would also be an interesting thing to bring in during this time period. We did a whole, there's a big standard in fourth grade for us is electricity. And so so bringing in some of those, I think, would have made would have connected students better to what we were learning, rather than just saying, okay, we're going to wire a house. Why? What's some story behind it? So let's move on to fifth grade. So here, I think the world is really open to you so much more. This age group is able to do a lot. So one idea I had about working with time periods is comparing. So using Edward Winslow's letter mentioning Thanksgiving. How do we know that our typical idea of Thanksgiving never happened? Why would people have created this view if it never happened? So bringing in points of view, bias, how history can get off or wrong. You can select parts of primary sources at this point, which may help some of the challenge in reading and deciphering some of this information to compare and contrast. You do not have to go all the way through. You could compare the beginning of a book to some things that are happening at the end, or take speeches. Martin Luther King. Did Martin Luther King intend to give the I Have a Dream speech? So I was thinking, you know, we all use essential questions. We try to guide the unit towards something and make the students think. But I thought it would be really neat to have these students, and you probably could do this with third and fourth graders also. You know your students best, but have them find their own resources, or give them a few resources and ask them to pick out the resource that for them best meets whatever sort of essential question or whatever questioning you're doing. So in Ellis Island, you could find multiple perspectives from children's accounts. So as the students are researching, they're having to use search knowledge to find a child who maybe was excited to come to America, and then maybe a child who was very concerned. Then you could question, why did they feel that way? How were they treated? Why did you choose the letter that you chose? Is there any bias in either account? So through questioning, you can really deepen the understanding. I think from kindergarten to 5th grade, you may be using different types of materials and allowing them to work with the personal primary sources differently, but engaging them in thinking and talking and sharing, it can lead you to a lot of different ways. So what are some tools to use for classroom success? This particular tool is on the Library of Congress page. It's really easy to search. When I was looking for primary sources, this came up a lot. And I really liked it because it takes the students, so they observe, then they reflect, and then they question. And then it gives you some sample questions. And they have different tools on the website. These are to use with documents. So it may help, guide some of your questioning. It may help give you some ideas of where to start. So I thought this would be a great beginning tool for getting students to think and engage with some of these sources. Describe what you see. What do you notice first? I have thought these were excellent questions for beginning using personal primary sources. And then I wanted to share with you some other ideas that I had. So there are many tools available for teaching with primary sources. One thing that I was thinking that I had not put on here, but I added later, is to look at the document or use your standards. What are you trying to meet with your class at this moment? Then you could slide an original document into a sleeve protector or digitally. There are many ways to annotate over images. So if you put in a sleeve protector, give a student a dry erase marker, then you can ask them to discover and engage and look for clues like historians. You could ask them to find words they don't know, facts, interesting details. You could have them highlight facts with one color and opinions with another. You could have them find interesting details, ideas about the author, hide the author's name, and have students try to figure out who wrote it. This could be just from one of their journal entries. How would they try to decide, what clues would they get that tells them who the author was? What things make you wonder? And you could do this whole group also with the younger kids. What could you connect? Could you connect anything to your life or whatever essential question that we're working on? Identify or highlight a sentence that made you think. Highlight a phrase that moved or engaged you or was something that you thought, oh, wow, that's interesting, or surprised you. Find a word, just one word that captured your attention. And then the all-powerful question, why? You can discuss using just peer groups. You could do a turn and talk, or you could discuss with a group or the entire class. So starting with the ones that I put on here is to maybe pair some of these with a picture book to make them a little bit more understandable, especially if you're needing to build some background for students. And on the opposite of that, what if you don't build any background and you just give them a document with nothing? Sometimes you can really see what their initial thoughts are, what their initial feelings are, and then how their thinking has changed by the end. Vocabulary we really talked about, but it may be looking for words they don't know, but it may be even looking for words that they do know. Sight words. This will just help make the reading easier later and less challenging and scary for students. Oh, I skipped one on here. So sentence, word, or phrase, as we said, with the highlighting, I talked about those just right at the beginning. And then notice, wonder, connect. So they find things that they notice that are interesting first. Then they're going to write some things or discover things that they question about, wonder about, and then connect that information to things that they already know. Then they can also do I think, I wonder. Sorry, I changed that and didn't save it. I think I wonder. And this could be simply as taking a sheet of paper and dividing it in half or 3, depending on how many columns you need. Right, I think at the top of one, I wonder at the top of the other, and have students just list certain things that they discover through their reading. Nothing fancy, but effective inquiry will be occurring in your classroom as students are engaging with these personal primary sources. So, ideas. I'm an idea person. I enjoy coming up with things. These are all things that I borrowed. So, quotable. You can have students just highlight one thing from the reading. We've sort of been talking about this, but with your older kids or even with the younger students, I know in K we do use talking marks. So it's a great way to just provide some examples of that through their personal primary sources. Make a story quilt. So what students could do is you could take something that they have been learning about and reading about in their personal primary sources, and then have them represent that in visual form. Say something. So I like this because it sort of shares the burden of the reading, which definitely for students would make it less scary. So pairs take different parts of the text, whether you could make it one sentence, you could make it a few sentences or a paragraph. So they'll read that part and then they'll stop and respond. So the person that read it will say something about what they read, and the person that was listening will say something about what the other person read. Then they'll read their chunk and they'll continue going back and forth all the way to the end. So this is a great way to ensure that the students are reading for meaning and maybe understanding some or most of the things that they are reading. With the smaller students, as they're reading, you could pause and do questioning. Did you understand? Or they could highlight things that they need more clarification on. Save the last word for me was fun. So as you read, you're going to find things that catch your attention for a lot of reasons, and you're going to highlight them. So in a group, then one person only shares their quote, and the rest of the group discuss that quote. Then when the discussion dies down, the next person discusses their quote all the way until that person that started it has the last word. So they're continuing through the quote all the way to the end. So let me say that one more time. So one person will share their quote, then the rest of the class will each get to comment on it, and when it dies down, the person that shared the quote will make their final comments on it. Maybe they found something, oh, I didn't think about that, about something that someone commented or said. Or maybe, oh, that's something I didn't know. Or maybe it's just affirmation to, yes, this was the best quote, and here's why. And then they move on. Then heart maps. I really like this idea, especially for some of my younger students. We work really hard on writing using what we know, but if it's not right, it's okay. So sometimes that is a challenge for all our kiddos that want to be right. But I thought maybe in some of their reading, you could use that heart shape even with the younger kids. So as they're reading, they notice things. So maybe a few people say, I noticed that that person really enjoyed their trip. And so maybe you write happy in really big letters. But they had to leave the dog behind. So as you're pulling out some ideas, you can add them into your heart. And depending on how important or how big or how often it happened, you can use a big font or different color to show the importance of each idea. Very much like a Wordle, but you're sort of creating it yourself. So I thought that was a great idea just to show importance and bring in main idea, even with our younger kids. Now, I do have a few tips as you're getting started. Teach students to rely on context clues when reading. That is going to help you some in some of the challenging readings. A lot of times they can figure out based on what is happening around the sentence or word that they're not understanding. You don't have to use the entire document. I make sure I hit that home. Take a few lines that are meaningful and use that, or have the students choose what they think was meaningful and work with those quotes. And always, always make time for sharing. My very last year teaching third grade, we wrote every day. And every day we shared, we had a certain amount of time for my lesson, then for writing, and then for sharing. And everyone would get a chance, but it may not be on the same day, and we would go in order. If they wanted to share, great. If they didn't, that's okay. But that was the only year that my students loved writing and were sad on the days where we had a field trip or a assembly where we did not get to do our writing time. So please make time for sharing. That's where your great discussions, your conversations, your building of social and civic discourse are all going to happen. Resources. I wanted to share with you because Social Studies School Services is offering Active Classroom Young Citizens in Nystrom World for free remotely. So sign up for those. Active Classroom has some great lessons and primary sources available to you. Young Citizens does also. So engage with those and try those. They're completely free for you to try. And where to find resources. There really are so many. I tried to give you the big ones here. So National Archives, including Docs Teach, Library of Congress, Smithsonian, or any museum. A lot of them have primary sources and letters and things on their sites. Historical sites. So I found a letter by George Washington from the mountainvernon.org. History Matters, including MiniPass. That is a website that has a lot of resources available for search, and you most often can search by grade level or at least a group of grade levels, so usually like a K3. And then teachinghistory.org has a lot of lessons available on their site for you to access. So if you need more answers, or if you're having some things that are not working for you, please reach out. Email Pam Gothard, pgothard@socialstudies.com or help@socialstudies.com if you're having a tech issue or a need. And I want to thank everyone for sticking with me. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to go all the way out. Through this, I appreciate you, and I cannot wait I would love to hear, I wish I could hear about you using personal primary sources in your classroom. And I noticed in our chat, I didn't want to mention it at the beginning until we got to the end, but I noticed in some of our chat questions, most of the things were hard and difficult. So I hope that I gave you some easy ways to take what the students are already using, already writing about, and embed that into many of the things that you are teaching them about the world around them. So thank you